I've been cooking Indian food since I was 10 years old, and my first teacher was my grandmother. And although I've cooked Indian food professionally, her knowledge still runs deeper. She didn't use any fancy restaurant tricks, just simple, flavorful home cooking for a family of 14 every single day. Today, I'm sharing 26 essential kitchen hacks that I learned from watching her cook, so you can cook Indian food that's better than takeout without compromising on flavor or wasting time. And the last one is the most important of this list. The first one is doing your prep before you start cooking. I prep all my vegetables and get all the ingredients out before I actually start cooking. This is the most important piece, even in a home kitchen, although this is common practice in restaurant kitchens. And the reason for that is that it allows you to focus completely on the cooking process and be immersed in it and enjoy it as much as possible. The second hack is about an ingredient that appears in almost every single Indian dish, and it's ginger garlic paste. Nobody likes to peel ginger and garlic, and so I love making these pastes in bulk. My grandmother would make ginger and garlic paste for all of the dishes for 2 meals that she was cooking for all of our 14 family members all at once. That makes the cooking process a lot more streamlined. You can even make ginger garlic paste and store it in the fridge for about 3 to 4 days. And for anything longer than that, you can store it in ice cube trays and freeze them for later use. The third hack is about a fresh herb that appears in almost all Indian dishes, and it's cilantro. I love cilantro, but it's impossible to use the whole bunch in a couple of days. And so the way I've seen my grandmother keep it fresh is by wrapping it in a moist muslin cloth and putting it in the fridge. That way the cilantro doesn't get soggy, but it also has enough moisture to stay fresh in the fridge. What I do these days is take a bunch of cilantro, wrap it in a damp paper towel, and store it in a Ziploc bag. It stays fresh for about 2 weeks in my fridge that way. One thing people always complain about when it comes to Indian cooking is that there are a lot of spices that need to be used in every single dish. And the truth is that you only need about 5, and you can use those spices in varying combinations to create a multitude of dishes. So I have these 5 spices in the front of my spice cabinet. My grandmother used a masala dabba, but I find these small airtight jars preserve my spices for a longer period of time. The goal here is to keep your most used spices in a place that's easily accessible, so you don't have to dig around through your spice cabinet to figure out which spice you're going to use. Salad in Indian cooking consists of onions, cucumber, tomatoes, and cilantro. And while I love the flavor of onions, I don't love the sharpness when it comes to a salad. And so one trick to be able to reduce that acrid flavor of raw onion is to slice them and soak them in some cold water for about 10 minutes. And that really makes their acrid flavor a lot mellower and more enjoyable when eaten raw. When it comes to onions, they are an essential pillar in Indian cooking, but we don't always use onions the same way. So for instance, if you're cooking Indo-Chinese food or kebabs, you would want the onions to be in the form of petals and in a large size. However, if you're cooking something where you want the onions to dissolve into the sauce, like my chana masala, you might want to make it into a paste or dice it. And if you're making my home-style chicken curry, then you want that lovely texture of onions to come through in the sauce, so we're only going to slice them. The first thing I saw my grandmother do in the kitchen, other than the prep, was to marinate the meat and fish for the day. And the marinade was very simple, just some salt and turmeric, but what it does is it allows the meat or fish to absorb the salt and be seasoned all throughout, and the earthy flavor of the turmeric really counteracts any fishy or meaty smells that might exist. Speaking of salt, seasoning in stages is something I saw my grandmother do all the time, and one of the tricks she used was to add salt to onions or after adding the tomatoes to help the dish cook faster. Salt essentially allows the moisture to be drawn out quicker, which results in a quicker cooking process. If you've watched any of my videos, you know that I despise store-bought spice powders. And you can use them in a pinch if you want, but they really don't have that flavor that homemade spice powders have. And it's a lot cheaper to make these spice powders at home, and they last a lot longer. I've always seen my grandmother making homemade spice powders, and the step that she never missed right before that was roasting the whole spices in a dry pan. That really brings out all of the essential oils in the spices, which takes the flavor to the next level. Try it at home and you will never go back to store-bought spice powders. In fact, I made a whole video talking about how to roast and grind your own spices. I'll link it for you here. Now that we've covered all the prep, let's get to the cooking process. When it comes to cooking Indian food, there are many different fats that are used, and in my household, mustard oil was one of the key fats. Now, mustard oil adds a lovely smoky flavor to fish or meat and is used profusely in Indian cooking, especially in Bengali cooking. One thing with mustard oil is that you need to get it up to its smoking point. Otherwise, you're going to taste that acrid, raw mustard flavor in your dish, and we don't want that. So smoke your mustard oil till it turns pale in color and then move on with the next steps. The next thing in the cooking process is to add whole spices. Now, you might think it's a very simple step, but in fact, you want to add the larger, woodier spices first and then add your grassier, mellower, milder, smaller spices like cumin and coriander later, because you don't want the cumin seed to burn while your cinnamon stick is still roasting. Speaking of spices, spices are added in 3 different layers. The first time is not the only time we're adding spices. You might want to use similar or complementary spices to keep the flavor profile cohesive. We first want to start by adding the spices in hot oil, which adds that low hum of spiciness in the background. The second stage is adding powdered spices when you add tomatoes or yogurt to your dish. And then the third stage is after you turn the stove off. That way you'll be able to recreate those complex depth of flavors that you typically taste in Indian dishes. If you're cooking meat or chicken, you want to add in the marinated meat or chicken to the hot oil with spices and saute them on high heat for about 4 to 5 minutes, or till the outside is opaque and the juices are sealed in. It's almost like sauteing the meat before you braise something so that you can develop that caramelized flavor before all the liquid ingredients go in. The depth of flavor in Indian cooking doesn't only come from the spices, it also comes from the fond that sticks to the bottom of the pan. So when you're sauteing your meat or chicken, you'll see some brown bits that stick to the bottom of the pan. That is not burnt. Do not wash that away. That is flavor, and that gives depth to the dish. The moment you add some form of moisture in the form of onions or tomatoes or yogurt, you will lift up all of that flavor from the bottom of the pan and incorporate it into the sauce. The most important step when it comes to developing flavor in Indian cooking is oil separation. This means that you've cooked all of your ingredients in the sauce to an extent where it's developed enough flavor and you're not going to taste any raw ingredients in the finished dish. So what happens is that you cook out all of the moisture from those ingredients, and the oil that was used in sauteing all of these ingredients floats to the top. What I've seen my grandmother do at this stage is to cook on a low to medium heat and stir constantly, because you don't want the bits to get stuck at the bottom of the pan and burn. So you want to keep an eye on it, and you don't want to cook it on very high heat. That low heat allows for even caramelization and flavor development. Only add hot water to the dish once you're happy with the flavor you've developed. So once you see oil separating, I would taste the sauce just to make sure you're you're happy with the flavor, and then add in the water to create the consistency of the sauce that you're looking for. The moment you add water, the dish stops sauteing or frying, and so the flavor is set. You're not going to be able to develop more depth of flavor after you've added water, so make sure that you're happy with where you are before you add liquid in. Now, if you're impatient like I am and you want your dish to cook faster, then cover it. That traps the steam and allows the dish to cook faster than with the lid off. I love the flavor of green chilies in Indian dishes. However, I'm not a big fan of the intense heat. So what I've seen my grandmother do is use a whole green chili towards the end of the dish. That gives it that lovely fresh green chili flavor without infusing too much heat into the dish. In most Indian dishes, we use some sort of acidic ingredient. Now that can be tomatoes or yogurt, and I love the rich creaminess that comes from adding yogurt to dishes. However, it is very tricky to work with because it can split. So here's what you do. The first thing you want to do is you want to make sure that your flame is very, very low before you add the yogurt in. The second thing you want to do is you want to thin out your yogurt if you have very thick Greek yogurt. Thinning it out gives it more body, which gives you more time to prevent it from splitting. The third hack is something that I barely do, but it does provide a pretty good assurance that the yogurt won't split, and that is to add a little bit of cornstarch slurry, which is just cornstarch and water mixed together, into the yogurt before you add it to your hot pan. This is something I've seen in every Bengali household, and I've seen my grandmother doing this to almost every dish she cooked, which is to add a pinch of sugar at the end of the dish. Now, this doesn't make the dish sweet, but it balances out the savory and acidic flavors in the dish. We talked about adding spices in 3 stages, and the final stage is after you're done with cooking. Add a sprinkling of garam masala and turn the stove off so that you don't cook away the beautiful fragrance. And to infuse the flavors of the garam masala into the dish even more, cover it and let it steam for 5 to 10 minutes before you serve the dish. Now, this one is something you've seen me do in almost every video, and I've seen in professional kitchens as well, which is to taste and season as you go. Nobody gets seasoning right the first time, and the goal is to taste your dish multiple times and adjust the salt and spices if you feel like there's something missing. The last step is the most important, and that ensures that you look forward to cooking and create the best possible dish you can, and it is to use all your senses, not just taste. Look at what's happening in the pan, listen to the sounds, smell the different aromas, and then make a decision on what you're going to do next. Use all your senses and you will be able to create the best dish you've ever made. So there you have it, all the essential Indian kitchen hacks that I learned from watching my grandmother cook. If you want more such helpful tips right in your inbox every week, sign up for my weekly newsletter. The link is in the description. Hack is about in it.